Welcome to the MS Dev Show, episode number 195. This week we talk with Larry Jin and Andrew Bybee about Microsoft Teams and the developer platform. Microsoft acquires GitHub. And Carl has some breaking 5-year-old news.
Raygun gives you complete visibility on errors, crashes, and performance problems affecting your end users. Replicate issues in seconds rather than digging through log files or having to rely on users to report errors or crashes. Raygun gives you a window into how users are really experiencing your software applications. Check it out today at raygun.com.
This week we have Andrew Bybee and Larry Jin. Both are PMs working on the Teams developer platform. How's it going, guys?
Pretty good. It's Friday.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it is Friday. And I'm actually, I don't like to call it camping because I'm basically doing it for a month and I'm still working, but I'm on the road living in my RV as I'm between houses. So I'm actually in Oregon right now.
Nice.
And there is a car show, and it's like a hot rod car show, so occasionally you might hear some loud engines in the background.
I think that's still camping.
Yeah, exactly. Sure, it's
Glamping.
camping.
Glamping is what they call it these days.
Well, I'm in the great room in my RV. It's if you saw it, I don't think you think it's camping. So my wife definitely likes it better than our house. Although now we don't have a house, so which actually really what this is for me, Carl, is practice for that conference. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, that conference, we've been there, this will be our third year in a row now. So it's a conference in the middle of Wisconsin in the Midwest of the United States where developers of all different backgrounds, not just Microsoft technologies, get together and spend 3 days in a water park with bacon at every meal. So if you really think that sounds awesome, come join us there because for the third year in a row, we're going to have a booth there. And like you alluded to, we're actually not going to be staying at the hotel this year. We are camping outside of that conference, which happens to be kind of a camping themed conference on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're doing it the right way. So
you guys are really taking this mobile workplace to heart. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I was really disappointed because I submitted a talk for that conference that was really about I called it extreme remote work. So it was really taking advantage. I'm actually over a cellular connection right now. So I have a cell booster that's on the back, and that goes into a little piece of hardware that boosts up that cell signal, and then that goes into an unlimited hotspot. And I'm actually getting video from everybody right now and transmitting video. I'm getting about 13 megs down, about 18 up, believe it or not.
Wow.
But yeah, it's like extreme remote work. And I'm able to also go in my truck, which is basically sound isolated. So I'm able to take phone calls in there. I'm actually getting really efficient at working like this. So I was hoping to do a presentation on it, but people didn't upvote it. And a lot of people were like super disappointed about that. So I don't know, somehow it flew under the radar.
So I think maybe after a couple of weeks of you experiencing this, we might have to make up for that and do a show.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll do a show on it. I figured, I'd get a little bit more experience and I can help other people basically go through the same transition. Plus, it's good preparation for my new house, which will have 1,000 by 1,000 gigabit internet. So living off of cellular for a month will make that feel really fast. Okay, so let's get to the comment of the week, which was from Nick. You want to talk about this one, Carl?
Yep. Nick reached to us on Twitter, where his handle is @Ismo. He said, "Whoa, Windows is comprised of over 6,000 repositories," and he found that out from one of our build shows this year. Yeah, and it is amazing. People don't realize how much code goes into making Windows. Absolutely. And yeah, I think we were blown away by that too.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be amazed. You'd be amazed when I used to work in Windows many eons ago, and we had the whole notion of labs, build labs, and the build labs were trying to sort of compartmentalize, a few hundred devs of code, and then trying to sort of get the code from those, build lab, those repos, trying to do the RIs, trying to do the, the integrate. It was crazy. So that was part of what was taking Windows so long to try and integrate. So the fact that we can at least get it down to 6,000 repos is, I would say, is a huge advantage. It's progress.
So that's better than how it used to be. Wow.
That's right. It's an improvement.
A reduction down to 6,000.
It is a lot of code.
Yep. So I'd recommend to anybody who hasn't listened to that episode. We actually had, I don't know, it was like 6 or 7 episodes from Build. People are probably tired of them at this point because we just published a whole bunch of them. But I recommend going back. There was a lot of really good stuff. And we had, some exhausted guests. We had some excited guests. It was a ton of fun.
Awesome. If you want to get mentioned on the show like Nick did, send us an email to feedback@msdevshow.com. Comment on Facebook, YouTube, or Stitcher, and we really like those 5-star iTunes reviews.
Absolutely. So let's jump into the news. So you sent me a link for this game. I don't know if you call it, it's like a game/simulator. It's called A Slower Speed of Light.
Yeah, this came out of MIT Labs, and they were trying to help people visualize like the theory of relativity. And for people who don't know, the theory of relativity, which was created by Einstein, really is a bunch of rules that explain what happens when you get near the speed of light. And one of the ways that they help visualize this is they kind of created this game. It's a first-person exploratory kind of game where you pick up these orbs, and every orb that you pick up actually slows down the speed of light. So as you go on, you start seeing how weird reality becomes when your movement starts to approach the movement of the speed of light. But instead of you having to get faster and having to react to things, the rules of relativity become closer to you. And there's a video on the website, if you go to the link in the show notes, that really shows, highlights like some of the things that become different in reality when that happens. And I thought it was really cool for them to showcase that in a game.
Yeah, that's cool. Very cool. Yeah, if you can't reach the speed of light, bring the speed of light to you.
Yeah. I know what I'm doing this weekend now.
Yeah, because you can download like a beta there, right, Carl?
Yeah, and to top it all off, the engine that they base this off of, the relativity engine, is open source as well. So if you need something where you can play around with the rules of relativity, they got something for you.
This actually looks really old. Is this really old, Carl? It says the spring 2013 beta release.
You know what?
Pitching a 6-year-old product, is that what's happening?
It doesn't matter. It's cool. It's new to me. Therefore,
Time is relative. Time is relative.
Yeah, Carl is so close to the speed of light. And to the rest of us,
boom.
Yeah, it seems like, to him it just happened.
It's either like that or it's like Paul McCartney doing corporal karaoke, where it's just always going to be cool, right?
Yeah. So, whenever I was like watching this video and they were talking about this, because it is really cool if you haven't seen it. I was just flipping through channels the other day, and Interstellar was on, and it's such a cool movie. I just love the time dilation that happens whenever they're near a black hole. Like that it really freaks me out thinking in those types of terms. So yeah,
I love that movie.
Yeah. The only issue, this is a little bit of a tangent, but the only thing that kind of bothers me about that movie now is I watched some video, and I think it was talking about everything that was wrong with the movie. And they were like pointing out like the organ sounds. It's just like brrr, brrr. Like that's like the whole soundtrack is just like organ notes.
Right.
And now when I watch it, I'm just like super aware of just an organ, just somebody's holding out a key for like the entire movie.
It's the Hans Zimmer sound, right? That's
Yeah, exactly. Let's see what else we got here. Announcing Microsoft Research Open Data. Datasets by Microsoft Research now available in the cloud.
Well, I do know this one is accurate or is recent. It has a June 2018 timestamp.
Good job, Carl.
So Microsoft announced that they're not only releasing a bunch of data that's free and open to use in the scientific community, but they're creating kind of a repository, a place where people can put their research and data that people can use for access to by the open community, which is really interesting. And you can go there at microsoftopendata.com.
Very cool. Yeah, I was just checking out some of the categories. There's some really neat research categories in there, and then you can go and start downloading those data sets. So that's pretty cool. What is this fooget.org?
This one's really cool. So I forget his last name, but his first name's Frank Kruger.
Kruger, yeah. I think it's pronounced Krieger, isn't it?
Krieger. We'll ask him again sometime because he
Go listen to the episode where I had him on. I pronounced it correctly when he was on the show.
All right, yeah. He's just a serial open source developer, and many Microsoft developers are probably familiar with NuGet. That's a place where you can put your put or get library packages that are available. And what fooget.org is a NuGet package browser combined with an API browser. What it does is you can search for your favorite library like newtonsoft.json or Gent or something like that. And it'll not only just show you those packages, but it'll go through all the XML documentation, pull that out, and help visualize that for you so you can see what's going on and how you would use those packages.
Yeah, that's super useful because I know there's a bunch of times if you're in Visual Studio and you're like, oh, I need this assembly or this class, this reference, and then you can't quite remember what NuGet package it's in, and then you got to go to your browser and look it up, and hopefully someone on Stack Overflow had the same problem you did.
Yep. Okay, so last story here. Microsoft acquires GitHub. Not just a private subscription, but the entire company. What do you have to say about this, Carl?
So, I think that we have a little bit of luxury here talking about this because we did have all those build episodes that kind of put us back, because otherwise we would have talked about this a few weeks ago. And I know when it first came out, there was a lot of confusion about what this was, what it meant, if it was even positive thing at all. And, I think one of the things that we can think of, that with this lapse of time that's happened is, is Microsoft a good steward for GitHub? And I think, while we've had time to let the dust settle, I think that we look at it compared to who else could have potentially acquired GitHub, and it was definitely a good thing. Mm-hmm. Microsoft has a very strong track record in open source and in acquiring companies and letting them keep their culture, but yet still allow them and enable them to push the boundaries on what their technology can do.
Yeah.
And looking at that, I feel very comfortable that Microsoft will do the right thing, not just for GitHub, but even for us. All four of us here are Microsoft employees, and we all depend upon GitHub in many ways. And if Microsoft were to screw that up, that would affect our jobs and our performances. So it's in Microsoft's best interest to keep this going forward along the path that it's already taken.
That's actually a good point, Carl. And I'll be the first to go use something else. Like, I remember it was a couple years ago when they're like, hey, please put your stuff on Codeplex. And I'm like, no, I'm putting it on GitHub. And luckily, eventually the tide turned and everybody started using GitHub. So if Microsoft, I know it's not going to happen, but if Microsoft were to screw up GitHub and there is something better out there, like, I'm going to switch. Like, I'll be the first one to go to something else. But I think, Microsoft is a company that values privacy. And, right, I mean, we have the right infrastructure, we have the right people, and obviously GitHub has a whole bunch of talent. I think there's really a minority of people that are thinking that something bad could happen out of this. And I think they're really stretching in those scenarios, to be honest with you. So, I just, let's talk in a couple years, and
Yep.
see where we're at. But I mean, we can talk then and you can say, Jason, you were so wrong, but like, I really don't think that's the case. I would be shocked if we did, if we really messed this whole thing up.
The other thing I would add there is it's always not necessarily obvious, especially to people outside the company. But if you're an external dev, the philosophy that Satya's brought into the company in terms of how we think about acquisitions is super different than what it used to be, right? So it used to be very much like, hey, we just bought you, now we're gonna, bring you into the Borg, and we're gonna sort of try and fold you across all of the various divisions. And if you looked at what we've done with LinkedIn, what we've done with Minecraft, I think what we're going to end up doing with GitHub, it's a much more, hey, what you're doing is awesome. We want to do that and more. And so please keep doing what you're doing. And I think that's a great story for everybody that's using GitHub today.
And also how much we just embrace open source. I mean, total reversal. I mean, I joined this company only about 6 years ago, and this was sort of the last stretch of the Steve Ballmer days. And back then, open source was kind of a dirty word, right? I mean, it was certainly wasn't not even embraced. It wasn't really even accepted. And now it's like, anytime you want to start a new project, you want to build something, the first thing you ask is, well, has someone else already done this? And let's go take advantage of that thing that they've already done. And I think this is definitely, I think we have to prove a little bit of that to the outside world that may not have seen that kind of internal culture change. But yeah, absolutely. I think this is really exciting for all of us. And there's so many really awesome integration opportunities. I think it'll really strengthen our developer story.
Yep. I mean, we are all Microsoft shills, as Carl said, but I think like I said, the proof will be over the next couple of years. So, reserve judgment for a couple of years if you're one of the doubters.
There's the Wait 1000 for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Okay, so let's get into talking about Teams, which is, in my opinion, is a really cool product. I actually use it a lot. I do have my set of complaints about it, but the things that I love tend to be the things that I complain about also. So that's probably a good sign. But kind of the first thing I wanted to ask you guys was, are there any stats or anything you can share kind of showing the success of Teams, or is there anything that stands out in your mind that kind of shows the success of Teams?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing we tend to talk about, obviously we look at recognizing it's still a newer product in market. So part of it is how many organizations are actually starting to look at the product and think about that evaluation process. And so, being an enterprise product, we know that that's going to be something that's going to ramp over time, especially when you're talking about going from 0 to, the size of an Accenture at 400,000 or, even larger accounts. So we talked about a couple of months ago having over 200,000 organizations that were actually active with Teams on a monthly basis, which is pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's just a lot of adoption there. And we're also, we talk about the fact that from an availability perspective, as a core Office 365 offering, really it's super easy to just turn on. If you've got Office 365, you can turn on Teams just like that. So from an adoption perspective, we feel pretty good about sort of what's going on there. I would say from sort of traditional numbers, if you look at sort of MAU and sort of numbers that you might see with Slack, we haven't disclosed those in sort of broad fashion, but I would say we feel really good about sort of the growth of ourselves as an enterprise product. And I think we could, we might be able to make claims about fastest ever, but I'll wait until we have sort of public statements about that to say more.
And it's only been out for what, a year? How long is it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
We just hit our 1 year anniversary in March. We had a little bit of a mini moment there. So I mean, think about the progress. And I worked on the V1 of this. Joined the team about 2.5 years ago, and it's just incredible to see how far we've come in 2.5 years. The user base, the excitement, and really the mind share that we've been able to capture with our customers. And just the amount of progress has been astounding.
One of the cool areas that we talked about a lot was, earlier in the year in 2017, we talked about Teams for Education. And in fact, that's been an area where we've just seen tremendous growth. I mean, we just have an incredible amount of usage that's coming from students and educators and folks in that, and not only in the U.S., right? I mean, the U.S. is still a huge IT market, but internationally as well. We're just seeing a sort of amazing adoption of that. And what's even cooler than that is that the stories that you get from these educators about sort of how Teams is changing the way that they teach. It's just really cool to see. So there's some great videos on the web, and we can point people to those maybe later. But it's great because it's a product that's making a difference for people, There's so many things that you come out, you're like, oh, that's nice tech, whatever. I've got 3 other versions that do exactly like that. But it's very different to sort of have that type of thing that's really impacting the way people are getting their stuff done, their work done. So that part's been very cool. I think even more than any of the numbers is just the impact.
Yeah, very cool.
So before we go too much further, I kind of wanted to, not everybody may have heard about Teams, except for maybe that it was a Slack competitor and that's all they really know. So
Yeah.
what is Teams? What can it do? And maybe for the people who have been using it, what is new in Teams recently?
Larry, you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, I think from day one, the way we've thought about Teams is we want it to be the hub for collaboration and teamwork and team productivity for Microsoft. And so when you think about the capabilities and the feature set, really, it starts from communications, best-in-class chat, calling, meetings, really having those rich meetings experiences, the ability to call people over both, IP as well as, using phone number. And then from that, if you think about communications as a backbone, all these other activities and collaboration that you can perform, whether it's with Office documents, with OneNote, with Planner, with Power BI, being able to bring in all of those collaborative tools from across Office 365 into a single place for your teamwork. I think that's really key to the value prop. And then beyond that, we extend out to external tools as well, right? So we have over 200 third-party integrations in the box. So whether you're talking about developer tools, productivity, sales and marketing, HR, analytics, covering a wide variety of these different integrations that are all rich in terms of the ways that you can consume and interact with them from within Teams. And the last thing I'll say is that, really built on top of the sort of secure and compliant foundation of Office. So you get things like information protection, you get, the manageability with Office 365 as an administrator. You're able to really set policies and control and manage how how your end users are consuming Teams. So I think kind of when you look at, when you take all that into account, we have a really compelling offering in product that was really tough to beat looking at some of our competitors.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, just build. I think there's something really important that you mentioned in there, which was like the fact that you were able to build on things like SharePoint actually gives you a ton of incredible functionality, like right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because when I put a file in there, like I know that I can go in there and like do versioning or, just like all the SharePoint type of things, which enterprises absolutely need.
Yeah. The other thing I guess I'd add there, there's a bunch of tech we can talk about. The sort of human element that I would say is there's a lot of friction that goes on in your day just trying to figure out which tool to use to get the thing done that you want to get done. And so whether you're saying, hey, we're going to chat over WhatsApp and we're going to use, drop files into Box, and then we're going to, use GitHub to do you've got 25 different tools that you try and use. And every single time you're like switching tools, you end up either like switching windows or you have to literally like start and close applications, and you have to figure out like, okay, how do I get back to the thing that will help me sort of do what I wanted it to do. Now, that can be as simple as like go open the apps, do file open, browse to the file that you want, and then bring up the thing and then scroll down to the place in the document that you wanted to edit it. So we do that all the time. We've been doing that for years. The thing that's interesting about Teams is it actually gives you a much better sense of rooting you in the context that you're trying to work in. And so whether it's, chats and being able to then have the chats and have documents and be able to get to those documents, not just sort of having to file transfer back and forth, but to get back to those things, or be in channels and be able to have, topics that we can talk about, and the stuff that we share is going to be available for people to share. I can put content that we all want to look at in the form of tabs or other sort of related content directly in that channel, and I don't have to go back and refine it. I just literally click on the tab and there it is. So there's just a whole bunch of that context, and I think that's what gets people excited in some respect, because it is about just kind of reducing a bunch of complexity in your life to just say, yeah, click here, click that, you're done, as opposed to, hey, here's the 25 steps for you to go and like figure out how to open up these other things. So that simplicity, I think, is kind of deceptive to a certain extent, because we're so used to having to work across all these different apps. Making it simple just becomes really sort of easy in that respect. And so to your point, like you can just connect back to SharePoint. You don't have to worry about yet another file store. You can just use the same tool that you're using for your phone to be able to talk to people over the computer. So there's a bunch of this where I think it's easy to kind of undersell it, but it actually is part of the sort of the simplicity aspect that I think goes a long way with folks.
Yeah, and this is sort of off topic, but I am really impressed too with the video capabilities in Teams. It seems to really deal well with like low bandwidth and bad connections.
Yeah.
I have had quite a few situations where I'm like, hey, let's do this call in Teams, and it does a really nice job for the video quality, video and audio quality.
Yeah, and I think that's because it's building on the shared infrastructure, right? It's shared services that we use for, Skype and for Teams and for sort of others across the org. So that part's cool.
Yeah.
And then I would say the other thing, just to kind of dump down into more of the technical level, part of what makes Teams, I think, really an interesting value proposition is that, when you look at like what we did for Skype for Business or what we've done with some other products where you start out with a Win32 app and then you've got to figure out, okay, now are we going to go do an iOS app? Are we going to go do an Android app? You think about how big the news was that Office was going to be on iOS, for example, a few years back. And when we came out with Teams, we said, hey, no, we're going to have apps available on the web and on the desktop and on iOS and on Android, like by default. Like
right day one. Yeah.
Day one. And so, I think we've done a lot to really try and drive a very modern perspective about how we build the product. We do a lot of code reuse, a lot of, the work that we're doing to, make sure that we can really leverage that core code in as sort of broad a way as possible, multi-platform from the beginning. And the way that we think about sort of how you think about extensions, for example, like if you look at classic sort of Office products, the extensions were very platform specific, very Win32 specific. We started coming out with things like the sort of Office add-in Agave type of approach, and we're trying to take a very modern approach to how you integrate content in. That's very sort of forward-leaning, service-oriented, web-based content, things like that. So I think when you put those two things together, like the simplicity and sort of the sort of modern approach from a technology perspective, I think gives us a lot of I'll say headroom to play with. It gives us a lot of sort of playground that I think is going to be really attractive for people.
Yeah, and then the second half of Carl's question was like kind of what's new in Teams, and I don't really know like when to kind of cut that off. So maybe the better question is like, Are there any sort of recent features that you guys are really excited about?
Yeah, so we had a couple of I'll say kind of bigger moments recently. Obviously Build being one that was a little bit more developer audience oriented, but we announced a lot of really exciting new platform features really targeted at developers and in particular our enterprise developers. So I think one of the use cases that's been really exciting as an opportunity with Teams is how organizations and companies and businesses can transform their internal processes and their sort of business workflows. To Andy's earlier point, if you look at Teams as one place, one-stop shop for where you can get your work done and perform a lot of the day-to-day activities and processes, whether it's stuff like approvals or getting support or looking up your 401k balance, there's a huge opportunity for these organizations to start pulling those in and bringing those into Teams as kind of, again, that one-stop shop. And so one of the bigger announcements at Build this year was the availability, we'll be rolling out a company app catalog. So the ability for you as an enterprise developer building a custom solution in Teams to then go and package and deploy that to only your organization or select people within your organization. So let's say if you have a sales tool that you've built, the ability to say, hey, I want all of the folks in my sales force to have access to this tool from within Teams. And we think that's going to be a huge opportunity to really help transform and modernize these business processes and using Teams as kind of the conduit for that.
Don't wait for users to report problems. Raygun gives you complete visibility on errors, crashes, and performance problems affecting your end users. Replicate issues in seconds rather than digging through log files or having to rely on users to report errors or crashes. Raygun gives you a window into how users are really experiencing your software applications, supports all major programming languages and platforms, and integrates with your current development workflow tools too. There's a free 14-day trial, and it takes minutes to implement, so start resolving issues in your application and check it out today at raygun.com.
The other thing that I would say we talked about at Build that was I think got a lot of good reaction was the work we're doing around and continuing to integrate SharePoint. into the experience. And so, we sort of showed some sneak peeks for that. Definitely some good opportunities though, and I think there's a strong community of devs that have been working on SharePoint now for quite some time, and so I think when we think about sort of how you build apps in SharePoint and how you can surface those and integrate them with other experiences inside of Teams, the combination is actually pretty powerful. So we got some really good feedback on that. We also got some really good feedback on the programmable voice and video platform work that we showed off at Build. So that's really cool. That's like basically if you're using Twilio today. That's an opportunity if you're an Office 365 customer to start building those types of communication applications actually directly inside of Office 365. So there's going to be a lot more. We're going to talk about that stuff a little bit later in the year, but the response for that was actually really good. So I would say we had, I think, a lot of good dev moments at Build. Mm-hmm. The other sort of main kind of new news that I would say that we talked about was earlier. And there's a conference for, if you're UC geek, you'd know about this stuff. It's called Enterprise Connect. 98% of the world knows nothing about Enterprise Connect. And so I won't talk about the conference itself, but the things that we talked about at the conference actually are really important for two reasons. One is that we talked about, last fall, we talked about how, hey, listen, we're going to be bringing Skype for Business capabilities into Teams, right? We want to think about Teams as sort of the hub for all of these communications and collab pieces. And there's a ton of enterprise features that Skype for Business has. And so we published a roadmap last September. We've been hitting that roadmap spot on for the last, 3 quarters now. And so we have more sets of features that we're going to be doing out this quarter that are going to basically make it really obvious that Teams is should be your preferred solution if you're using Office 365. So we talked about our progress there and include meetings and things like that. But the other thing that we also showed off that was actually really cool, just from a geek perspective, is really all the work we're starting to drive in terms of devices and communication devices. And so we showed off really our vision around how we see Teams being part of the device strategy going forward, including Cortana on all these devices. So like we see Amazon going after with, their Echo devices, and we see Google going after that. But we've got a huge millions and millions of phones that are installed. And so the ability to go out there with a Teams-based story that enables Cortana and enables always on. So now you can start doing voice commanding against these enterprise devices, both in sort of common area like meeting rooms as well as like personal devices. We showed us some really cool docks that allow you to, have your Teams app on your mobile phone. You dock your mobile phone. It's got wireless charging. It's got the handset that's basically a sort of a Bluetooth dock, so you can use the handset for the calls, but it's all coming through your mobile phone. Kind of like your camping situation today, except just imagine your camper's a mobile phone dock. But basically, that ability for you to have those things connected really starts to speak to, I think, the story that we're trying to tell about how devices and kind of ambient communications and collab will start playing a bigger role. There was some really cool stuff we announced a couple of weeks ago with sort of the intelligent display work that we're doing, which is about putting like compute into the displays, and also with like the new Surface Hub. Yep. That's also going to have Teams baked into it. So there's just so much stuff coming that surrounds sort of this picture. It's crazy because we could spend hours literally talking about it. But the bottom line of it is, again, we're doing this all on a sort of a common code base. And we're doing this with a common approach to how developers and enterprises can actually extend and participate in this. So we think there's just a ton of opportunity there for people. And so it's new. It's still new to a bunch of folks, and we recognize that. But we think that there's just a lot of good stuff ahead for people to take advantage of.
I think that really starts to answer the question of like why Teams. You were mentioning like those integrations and Cortana and all these other things. Like, yeah. I just mentioned SharePoint earlier, but when you think about all the different products that Microsoft has as far as productivity, if you imagine a world where all of that stuff works together in the way that you think it should, then Teams has this massive feature set, or it's tapping into this massive ecosystem that just nobody else can do. I think that's pretty powerful. I think that's a pretty powerful story.
Completely agreed.
Yeah. So, you were talking about like the architecture and how, how Teams was actually built. One of the big questions that I had, I know that Teams recently came over to the Windows Store. So can you talk about the technology that's built on? I know before the show we were talking about like, hey, is this PWA? And you're like, well, it's far more complicated. It's not, it's not an on-off switch for PWA. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll give a bit, and then Larry should jump in because he's got even more background. The basic story, we were talking about PWA. The term sounds a lot more binary than it actually is.
Well, and actually, we should say progressive web app for the people listening, if somebody hasn't heard that term, yeah.
If you haven't heard the term, PWA, progressive web app, hosted web app, if it's a Windows thing, UWP, Universal Windows Platform. The bottom line is there's a set of, the approach that we've taken generally with the Teams client is that we have a core foundation. It's an Angular-based app that's sort of founded with some native components. So for example, some of the calling components are able to use native components when available. They also know how to use, for example, WebRTC. So if you're running Teams in a browser as an Angular app, it knows to use the media stack from the browser that supports that. So if you're running Edge, you're running Chrome, we know how to use that as sort of your local media component. But there are some other places where we've got some sort of local experiences. And then when you look at that, we have that same core sort of Angular package that we can then also use as the basis for some of the work that we're doing for iOS and Android as well. So it's part of how we're able to sort of deliver the experiences in a more sort of progressive way. And then we also use Chromium as the sort of the host today for getting that on Mac. So, a lot of shared code, a lot of sort of host translator, I guess I'll say. And our work around PWAs is a very similar model. So basically, with the work that we announced for the Store app, it's basically saying, hey, listen, you can have an Edge container that's running this stuff. And if it's a hosted web app, then it's basically, it still looks like an app, but it's an Edge-based container for that. And the progressive web app is that it's literally running in Edge, and you can now start to just sort of drag it into its own thing. So there's just a bunch of other benefits that come from that, including access to a lot of the local APIs. And so if you look at what we announced for the Windows Store, we're taking advantage of some of the local APIs and Windows and some of the translator for that, but not all of them. And so that's going to be an evolution for us over the next, probably 6 to 12 months as those things kind of roll out. So this just comes back to my point. It's not a binary thing. There's sort of a evolution of things that go along with it. But that's sort of the basics. So I don't know, maybe Larry, if you had other pieces you wanted to add.
No, that's great. And totally. I think one of the big benefits to us taking advantage of the Edge platform, especially for the hosted web app, is that it actually assists us with things like accessibility. And we can actually get richer accessibility for things like narration, screen reading, as opposed to what we get today with the Electron-based desktop client, for those that are familiar with kind of the Electron shell technology. So that's another one of those benefits. Like Andy said, it's going to be a process for us. And the other thing I'll add too is kind of going back to how Teams is built and architected is because it's built on these modern web-based technologies. Allows us to innovate quickly. It allows us to deliver those new experiences from the service as opposed to having to ship client bits and updates. But it also helps our developer story, our extensibility story, because now as a developer, if I want to go embed some content, I want to go bring my web application experience and integrate that deeply into Teams and embed it, it's a lot easier than if we were to kind of roll something completely native from scratch.
No, that's a great point. And I do know some people, I'm actually getting to the point where I'm running more and more stuff on the web. Teams I actually do run locally, but Outlook I actually use the web version now, and it's really good. So I'm starting to do that transition where I'm using less and less local applications. And like I said, I have seen some of my colleagues using Teams in a browser, which I think is pretty cool.
The one thing that I'll add, and I'll just get this proactively out of the way because it's probably the one thing that we hear feedback from the audience. As an Angular-based app, Teams is using the host. The host has its own memory, so Teams itself can be a fairly sort of memory-intensive situation, depending on what you're doing.
Never heard that.
Never heard that one. Sure. And so I just want to assure the audience, the folks that are listening, that there's actually quite a bit of work that we're doing, both in the near term and in sort of the medium term, to really start to shift that perspective. And so, I think you'll see some very good things coming out in the sort of weeks and months as it relates to just really getting that to be an even more lean machine as we're sort of optimizing both the sort of per platform as well as the cross-platform kind of workload. So just know we hear everybody. Yep. We're working on it.
No, that's great.
It's coming.
That's great.
So another Teams announcement from Build was kind of integration with the Microsoft Graph. Why was this done, and what does it mean for the Teams app itself?
Why was it done? That's a great question. Um, so Graph is an interesting story itself, and we can maybe have the history lesson later. What I would say in the short story is um, we really recognize that as part of driving teams, there's a lot of automation opportunities. And one of the things we talked about at Build was the ability to automate kind of the life cycle around teams and channels. So for example, like we had talked about teams for education before. Like, what do you do at the beginning of the school year? You have a bunch of classes. Like, how do you spin up teams for all those classes? Is there somebody sitting there going click, 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 click?
Probably.
Or do you want, or do you want to be able to do automation? And so part of it was about, hey, listen, we know that there's, especially around sort of the collaboration aspects of it, there's definitely a lot of automation that you want to be able to do. And so that was one of the key things that we showed at Build was, hey, now you have these APIs that come through Graph that allow you to create teams, clone teams. You can use templates. So it's like if I have the same class, and I know that that class is going to have the same set of curriculum or the same, this is the week 1, week 2, week 3, whatever. Like I can create all those and make sure that everything is the way that it needs to be. So those are sort of really impactful elements for us to do that. The other thing that I think is more from a, I'll say, strategy and a developer sort of perspective is just the consistency of it. And so, when we think about Graph, it's as much a story of having a consistent model for building stuff as much as it is about having all of your data in one place. So I think, you get the value of both of those things, and it starts to show up where we say, hey, when you're creating a group, that group is the group that founds the members for your team, but it also is the group you can use for your calendar. It's the group you can use for SharePoint. It's the group for Teams, for SharePoint membership. So it's about sort of all of those things, the data and the sort of dev simplification, and that we tried to then show how that would also then extend past just the data aspect of it into really more of the action aspect of it. So the big work that we announced around programmable voice and video, it's not just that the functionality was there, but it's actually showing how you can do real-time calling and call control through an HTTP graph media-based model that is actually really interesting, and again, sort of drives that consistency point. So I think those are sort of some of the initial motivations or the near-term motivations for Graph. I think as you look forward, that is our strategy. Is Graph is the sort of foundation for that, and it drives a whole bunch of other goodness. One of the things we also talked about at Build was the work that we were talking about with being able to do Azure-based ML over your organizational data. And that's a huge opportunity as well. But again, that's because you're using Graph and some of the tech there. So it's a strategic bet that data is an asset that developers are going to care about and that orgs are going to care about. And we're all about, contributing and helping to drive the strategy.
Very cool. Very cool. So now let's talk about integrations with teams. So how do I build what you would call an integration?
Yeah. Well, so first off, we do call them apps,
Okay.
so not to confuse with the Teams app. But some people refer to them as integrations as well. So we have a very rich platform. Graph obviously is one of the pieces that Andy already mentioned, but there's a lot of other facets to building an app as well. We support chatbots, so the ability to have a conversation with a service and to be able to quickly look up information or perform tasks through integrated chatbots. But we also support what's known as tabs. So this concept of bringing content alongside your conversations in whatever context you're in, and then having that there to foster and enable collaboration. So to give you an example, Planner is one of our most successful tabs, and if you think about task management, project management, right? So you have this team, you have something that you're all working towards, some shared goal, and part of that is going to be you want to keep track of who's working on what and when's it going to be done, and whom those tasks are assigned to. And so the ability to have your conversations and your teams and channels is kind of the backbone, but then to hang off these other activities via tabs like task management, like document collaboration, or dashboards and reporting, via Power BI. These are obviously some Microsoft examples, but we have obviously a large number of third-party examples, as I mentioned earlier. And so, we think about the sort of core user interaction model. So you've got these rich chatbots where you can interact via text and via cards. Adaptive cards being an example of that. That's something new that we talked about this year at Build, or more of a content-oriented style of integration through tabs. And then I'll say, to kind of tie it all together from a developer perspective, once you've actually built your app, you have kind of a couple different options for how you want to go distribute that, right? So if you're building for an organization, you can use the company app catalog or the organizational app catalog that I was talking about earlier that we announced at Build, or you can publish your app to the Office Store and actually make that generally available for all Teams users. And that's an open submission process that we have. Anyone can build an app and they can submit it to the Office Store. And if it passes the checklist and gets approved, then it'll show up for all the Teams users.
Very cool.
So are there any interesting features of Teams that you don't think many people know about that you want to highlight?
I'll just submit my candidate for my favorite. This is a relatively new one. I think it's actually gone to GA just only very recently. And now, in January we changed the UI a little bit and we moved the search box to the top, and now it's colloquially known as the command box. And what's cool is that it's this kind of universal entry point not only for searching for stuff, but you can also do commands from it. So you could do like a /DND if you wanted to quickly change your presence. But a new feature that we recently announced.
I had no idea about that, by the way. I just now realized that it says, hold on, search or type a command.
Yeah.
And if I hit the slash, there's.
So now I'll really blow your mind.
Okay.
Is that let's say you're in a meeting, right, and you're looking at a presentation, but you want to quickly ping someone. It's pretty painful to have to go switch out of that meeting, go into a chat, type the thing, and then come back. So now what you can do is you can actually mention a person directly from that search box at the top, and basically send like a quick one-on-one IM. Without leaving, your current context. So if you're in a meeting or a call, or you're just, doing something within a channel and you don't really want to have to leave, but you want to go send a quick message to someone, you can actually do that now through the search box. So just kind of a quick multitasking feature.
Okay. I was just trying that. It doesn't, it's not finding you. Oh, there. Carl just sent me one. So I do see Carl in there. Why don't I see you in there, Larry?
I'm guessing I might be there because we use it all the time. So I can find you quicker.
Yeah, it's like a person search caching thing. There's a lot more that we want to do with the search experience. And so you're going to see improvements over the next in the coming weeks and months. But long story short, it's basically like a caching thing where you'd have to find me first, and it's probably because I'm not cool enough that you'd have talked to me on Teams before.
You guys got to talk more, apparently.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah, I just sent Carl. That's really cool. Sending your message. I saw in here too. There's like who. Let's see here. Such who.
There's a bunch of stuff in there.
Carl Schweitzer. That's pretty cool. Okay. Anyway, I'm just getting distracted at this point. I had no idea that was up there. It's so bad too because it's one of those things where I'm just blind to it because I go in usually with like I have my routine and I just never notice that it says search or type a command. So thank you for that.
Yeah. One of those power features, and it's interesting because I think it's especially when you start talking about doing the slash, and there's a whole bunch of behaviors you can now start doing sort of right out of the box. So it's definitely one of those things. Once you find it, you're definitely going to want to use it.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Anything else that you guys wanted to share with our audience? Or is there any roadmap information? Anything upcoming that you can talk about?
There's a lot of stuff that we talked about at Build, and obviously those things are all in flight and sort of showing up. So, as a developer, I think one of the key things is it's definitely worth staying in touch, just, sort of keeping in touch with sort of as features are coming out. You have the ability to sort of sit in on the developer preview ring and see some of the features before they hit general availability. So if you're thinking about, hey, is this something I want to play with? We encourage you to go do that for sure. I think, I just want to double down on Larry's point. one of the big things we're going to be doing over the next few months is really continuing to really emphasize this story about how it's a great vehicle for enterprises to build these integrations and deliver them in a very broad way across their organization. And so whether you want to deliver your HR apps or, sort of places that people should be taking, a look at, or even simple things like timesheet apps, like, I need to be able to get sort of timesheet apps out to my whole organization. There's a lot of opportunity for people to start bringing those integrations in, and whether they're built on SharePoint or built in Azure or, other tech, like, you can still bring those integrations in. So there's just a ton of opportunity there. And so I think between sort of staying plugged in on the developer preview, because we don't tend to necessarily think about these things as like big quarterly releases. We tend to think about them as, hey, these are features that are coming out. So that's a key one. Getting involved in enterprise, I think, is the second one. And then I think the third one, just to, again, really hammer on Larry's point is we're fully integrated with the whole AppSource Office Store process. And so if you come up with a really cool integration, you can deliver that as a bot, you can deliver that as integrations for teams, you can deliver that to the public, and you have opportunities, right? So there's opportunities to make money, to sell your stuff, to take your service integration and turn that from sort of a one-off thing into IP. And I think that's a great opportunity for people to take a look at. And you can be using the latest tech. You could be building really cool bots, using all the conversational stuff, using all the cool ML stuff from Azure. Like, there's just a ton of stuff that you could go do. And Teams is a great, growing, amazing way to try and surface all that stuff. So we want to really encourage people to take a look at it and just recognize that we're putting a lot of wood behind this thing, and we want people to come along with us.
Yep. Well said.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so let's move on. So, Carl, what do you have for the Azure pick of the week?
I found this pick of the week on GitHub on a repo by Noel Bundick. And have you ever been in a spot where like you're creating a proof of concept and you definitely want like a temporary like assets and infrastructure up in Azure that you're going to have to delete, but you wish it would just delete itself? Well, this guy created a self-destruct mode when you create resources. So you could do like AZ group create, give it your details, and do -- self-destruct 2H. And in 2 hours after creation, it'll just delete itself.
That's awesome.
How did he do that? That's really cool. So it's a CLI extension?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's also
possible.
It's also great if you're giving a demo, like if you're doing your stand up or something at the end of a sprint or something, or if you're doing like a talk at a user group, or if you're just doing like a hands-on lab, where instead of like spinning up these resources and then like remembering to delete them, it's so great when it just deletes itself. When we talked about automation earlier, I thought this one was just super handy.
How does that work?
Yeah, go read the code later, Jason.
I'm reading it now. I want to know, like, does he keep something running? I mean, it must, right? Because it's like the command line then has to go self-destruct it after that. I don't really see where all the code is, though.
Well, you know what? If it sucks, you can go tell me next episode.
Yeah, that's really cool, though. Because we have, it's kind of interesting because on our team we've built a whole bunch of tools to do similar things, not the self-destruct though, but we basically.
But it emails you naggingly.
Yeah, I was gonna say we basically self-destruct with annoying emails. So things expire and then they start getting a whole bunch of threatening emails, and then people start threatening. And then what do we have for the dev tip of the week, Carl?
GraphQL is a really cool technology for the web to be able to get your data in the way that you want. And there's now a GraphQL plugin for Visual Studio Code that does auto-completion, jump to definitions. And the coolest one is it'll validate your queries against your GraphQL schema. So it'll let you know if you're typing in a query that's going to be in violation of that.
Yeah, that is cool.
Cool.
Yep. So I actually have a second dev tip of the week. If you have WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux installed, when you right click in the Windows Insider versions now, if you right click in the Windows Explorer, you can actually open Linux shell here. So instead of going open command here, you can go open straight into the WSL.
Very cool. I found the code. Sorry. I found the code, but I don't see how he's doing it because it's like registering something. I don't know if he's registering a cron job. Or oh no, because this would work on Windows as well. Because I see where it can load up the next time you run a command and start to destroy those. So I haven't figured out how it comes back to life and does that. But anyway,
The 3-minute code review by Jason Young.
yeah, we can move on.
Stick it in.
Yeah, and I don't have the question game, and I'm actually not going to have it for the next month. It's all packed, so unfortunately we can't play that fun game with our guests, but we'll survive.
No.
So I was going to ask you, so Andrew, where can people find you online?
You know, I'm a kind of a social recluse, so I would say if you want to get in touch with me, you can always go to my profile on LinkedIn.
Okay, that sounds good. And Larry, where can people find you?
I was going to say the same thing. I for my age category, I'm lame, so I don't have the Twitter and Snapchat handles. I do have a Twitter. I use it mainly to just read news, so I don't really post much on there.
Okay.
But yeah, like Andy said, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect, hit me up, shoot me any questions.
That's interesting that the social recluse people they're all on the same team and they're writing Microsoft teams.
We're working on a collaboration product.
That's it. Yeah, it's interesting.
You know,
You're just not happy with the status quo, I guess.
I think it's more that we spend all of our social time at work.
Yeah, that's probably it. Okay, and where can people find you, Carl?
You can find me on Twitter at Carl Schweitzer.
And you can find me on Twitter at twitter.com/ytechie. So guys, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about Teams. And, I think it's really cool how is a developer platform, which I think makes it very relevant to our audience. I hope that people keep, working with this, making it cooler, integrating it. And it's great to see all the progress on Teams.
Awesome.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.